So who are you and what do you do?
My name is Stephen Shadletsky. Friends like you call me Shed, so call me Shed. Author of the book Speak Up Culture: When Leaders Truly Listen, People Step Up. And I help leaders suck less.
I was actually trying to figure out how to spell your name because I just call you Shed, which is
Yes.
very easy to spell. So
Yes. There's a reason for that, Mitch. That's why we go with Shed, because all the other letters.
So let's speak about this book and the concepts of the book. It's a crazy time in the world, and I'm sure the world wasn't even as crazy as it is now versus when you first came up with this idea. We're asking people to speak up and feel empowered in a world where people are being canceled at insane rates, in a place where one tweet or misplaced text message can get you into a heap load of trouble, including leaders. It's not just about people who work in organizations.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how you see society and culture in a place where everything you write in the book makes complete sense. And yet it seems to almost run diametrically opposed to what anybody would tell an employee. Like, don't actually speak up too much because it's a surefire way to either get canceled or maybe express yourself in a way that might be a microaggression or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we know and we've learned is there's a difference between a book cover and the contents within that book. And so take a Kim Scott Radical Candor. Without reading what's inside the book, you could think, oh, that's just an excuse to be a jerk all the time. Some of the nuances that I've learned with Speak Up culture is that Speak Up is not an instruction. Speak Up is a culture. Speak Up is an environment in which leaders and members of a certain culture, community, or society both make it safe and worth it to speak up. And so my push and the impetus for this book is not an instruction for people to speak up about all the things that at all the time. You know, that's not what effective vulnerability is. That's oversharing. And so it's really around how can we, in our relationships, in our leadership, make it safe and worth it for the people around us to speak up and share their ideas, their feedback, their concerns, their disagreements, and even mistakes, all in the interest of making things better around here. And so not all places, it's not always safe and worth it to speak up. Case one, Twitter, it's not always safe and worth it to speak up there.
But it does feel that those spaces that are safe are not getting bigger and healthier, but diminishing because of the nature of information. I could say something and someone grabs it and does tweet it, even though it's internal. We see this happening day in and day out, where it does feel like we're more polarized, we're more afraid. We see it happening to peers, we see it happening to individuals every single day. Whether it's wokeism, like I said, microaggressions, whatever it might be, the cultural winds seem to be in a place where you need to be extra careful and check yourself a lot more than we thought.
I mean, this is true. I think we need a lot more calling in rather than calling out.
Tell me what that means.
So let's say, Mitch, I say something that's completely insensitive. As opposed, I think we need to move more toward a future where you don't capture that, where you or someone doesn't capture that snippet, share it everywhere just to get me canceled. I'm trying to create more of an environment where there's trusted relationships and friendships for you to say, hey, Shed, I don't think it was your intention, but you just said something that could actually be interpreted as being quite insensitive. Now it's my responsibility not to say you're an idiot and a jerk, Mitch, and I think you're wrong. My responsibility is to have the humility to say, tell me more. And so, I can't control the algorithms. I can't control what happens out there, but I can influence this. And so I wrote a business book that's actually disguising itself because it's truly a philosophy book. I want to help contribute and create to a movement and to a future where there is more humility and forgiveness and space. And so the only way that we can influence that is not in the zeitgeist and the algorithms and things that are out there that we cannot influence, but in the relationships that we choose to invest in and influence. That's what I think we can actually influence and make better.
So how are we doing? And how are we doing with this in a world where still we walk outside and don't want to look the wrong way anymore? People feel a lot of pressure, and I'm not just saying this as a way to put you into the corner. We need to have these tough conversations. I think they're realistic. I think they're reasonable.
Yep.
I'm feeling it you're feeling it. I like to walk around and think I'm uncancelable, but I think we all know everyone's cancelable in
Sure.
one way, shape, or form. And I do find myself often holding my words, and even more recently, listening to some really I recently went to go. I recently attended a conference called Dissident Dialogues, and it brought a lot of these people to the forefront of anti-wokeism and where we're moving, and DEI, and a very diverse group, people who had actually even been canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And there is still one of the people who is not white cis male, but falls into definitely one of the target audiences that we would be careful about talking about, was very clear about wanting to hear more how people really are so that we can have real things versus this performative thing we're doing where you say this and I react this way and I tell you how I feel and I react, when ultimately all we're having is this performance of people being afraid versus really bringing that true self, because the true self is going to happen when we have harder conversations, and it bothers me that we're not having that.
Yeah. So I think a couple things. Again, we have to pick the spaces and places where we feel that we'll actually be accepted, celebrate, rewarded for being ourselves. This whole notion of bring your whole self to work. If your whole self happens to be asshole, there are still repercussions for that, right?
50%. How am I doing, Shed?
So far, you're doing okay, but I'll let you know.
We'll see.
Yeah. So a few things. So one of my favorite podcasts right now is Smartless. Which is Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, Will Arnett, and they literally just come on and they kind of shoot the shit for a bit, and they have a random guess, and they always sort of joke where they say something that could get one or the other canceled.
Right.
But here's the thing: they aren't trying to be canceled. They aren't trying to be a-holes. We are fallible human beings. If there is one thing that is common with all of us, is we're fallible. And I think that if we're leading with our values transparently, we're trying to do the best that we can, I think there can and is forgiveness, and there should be more forgiveness.
Yeah.
And if you choose to have a career or life that's very much in the public eye, that's part of the repercussions of being in the public eye, is there's scrutiny. But yeah, I think if we lean more into our humanity and our fallibility and our values, it's less performative and more authentic. And I think when it's less performative and more authentic, there's more forgiveness.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about like the situations we find ourselves in that put us in a place where we'll understand better the type of cultures we have. When I was reading the book and getting ready for this conversation, I thought about it would be so different to have this information before choosing a place to work versus I am currently 5 years in, 10 years in, looking around. It's very, very different positioning for the individual. And I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit to this idea of what does it look like from the outside to somebody to know this is a place that embraces this more, or that you won't be punished for, or that it'll actually be celebrated, and that we actually do want this back and forth.
Yeah. And so, and just a definition. So what is a speak up culture? A speak up culture is an environment in which people feel it is both psychologically safe and worth it to share what they think, what they feel, ideas, feedback, concerns, disagreements, and mistakes. And there's a real economic and business benefit to this, because you get to hear what people see, feel, know at whatever rank of the organization. One thing to note is that cultures change. Cultures change based on who's leading them. I've seen, let's take Microsoft as an example. Microsoft under Bill Gates, dorky, but quite innovative and quite infinite-minded. Microsoft under Ballmer, very cutthroat, very competitive, very performative, very Jack Welchian rank and yank, right? And they made some good products, but healthy culture, very competitive cutthroat culture. But now Microsoft under Satya Nadella, completely different, reinvigorating the soul of Microsoft and such. One of the really healthy signs of a speak up culture is an environment in which we disagree and debate well. It isn't an environment where there's groupthink and we all nod our heads and agree. It's actually one where there's respectful dialogue. There's one in which I could say to you, Mitch, I don't yet understand, or I don't yet agree with what you're saying. Can you share with me the data, the research. How did you get to this conclusion so that I can join you in it? Because I'm not there yet. That's a sign of a healthy speak up culture. So I think you can ask interviewers questions like, when was the last, or when you're being interviewed, ask interviewers, when was the last time you disagreed with your boss or someone more senior to you? How did it go?
That person's not here anymore, Shed. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good sign that you don't have a speak up culture and you might be working for Dr. Evil, right? So, but these are, these are good signs, or these are good questions. But it's also, I don't think it's only about having a speak up culture, because you could have environments where people just disagree all the time. But are the other values that the organization espouses and hopefully lives, do those resonate with you?
You mentioned Jack Welch. It's always interesting to hear his name, especially recently. There seems to be this conversation out there that, well, that wasn't the way we should have been running organizations, and a lot of negativity towards him. It's not surprising to me. What I think is surprising to me is if I go back in time and think about his books like Winning and From the Gut, they were really, at the time, they felt very intuitive. They seemed very powerful. They were books that we lauded and celebrated and had him up there as CEO of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that's going back to culture. Is that a cultural shift? Is that a value shift? Why do we now look back? It's one thing to look back on slavery and go, bad idea. I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
We look back on this as a management style and think, oof, that seems a bit brutal or harsh. And I'm not saying one way or the other. I understand where it's coming from, but I don't really see so much that has changed in the economy or capitalism that would lead me to believe that, we don't lead like that today. I think people definitely lead like that today and are probably even more harsh than that. But we create this other side of, we have this model for what might be the perfect way to run a business and do business. Why do we vilify that so much? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think a couple things. I think Welch became popular in a time of economic boom where it was easier to succeed because I think more people were succeeding at that time. And he was very much a practitioner of Milton Friedman's ideas, where the responsibility of business, Friedman theorized, is to maximize profit and shareholder value while staying within the bounds of the law and ethical custom. Well, it's become ethical custom to lay off thousands of people when you don't meet arbitrary numbers, even if you're profitable. It's ethical custom doesn't mean it's ethical. I think look no further, Mitch, than what we're seeing with what's happening at Boeing, because Boeing is being led under the same ethos of maximize profit and shareholder value. If you look at every major decision from the outside in that Boeing has made since, 1994, when they purchased McDonnell Douglas, but then instated all of the McDonnell Douglas leaders as the C-suite leaders, moved corporate headquarters away from engineering focused Renton, Washington, to Chicago, and now Arlington, Virginia. The number of resources that have been dedicated to stock buyback as opposed to R&D and safety and quality. And now, years later, they're saying, we're going to change our ways. We're going to encourage and reward people for speaking up. Well, you have 30 plus whistleblowers who now feel threatened for their health and well-being because 2 of them have mysteriously died. This is weird stuff.
Allegedly.
They're dead. They're dead.
Yeah,
the circumstances with which they have died, allegedly suicide and a mysterious short, harsh illness for a 45-year-old male. What is going on? So I agree with you that I think a lot of the same ways that Welch made practicing business popular are still very much in effect today. And I'm trying to shift it because I don't think it's in the best interest for the health and well-being of humanity and where we live.
So how do we shift it? Because there's one way to say we want to shift it, but there's another where the economics don't mean that. So I would see organizations where people can speak up and they do have a great culture, and they'll still turn around and go, quarter's coming up, time to fire 500 people. And nobody really blinks. It becomes so pervasive in the media that they just feel almost like road bumps, sadly, along the way. And again, I'm getting back to this idea of we say things. This has been my kick for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading these books, and all of them have great ideas and thoughts. Speak up culture being one of them, empathy, all of these things. And when we just look at it, the economics are still running the same system. So you have
Yeah.
these powerful leaders who have these brilliant new ideas, but it doesn't seem to be converting. And I'm not saying we haven't moved away from, the Milton Friedman idea of shareholder value, but I don't necessarily think we have, even though we've had institutions to come out and say we can no longer do this. We have to be customer centric. Prices are going up, interest rates are going up. The world looks pretty crazy from where I'm. I don't know what the world is like, but I just bought a sandwich and a muffin in a supermarket and paid $30 for it. So how do we get that to come together? I mean, we're people like you and I are yelling, but
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like the economics care.
Well, so culture and things change, I've found, across 3 interconnected gears, and all of them need to be turning. And the 3 gears are mindset, action, and system. And you don't need to go in that order, but eventually they all need to be turning. So I'll start with system, because I think there's a broken system that we're operating within, and the broken system is capitalism and public markets. If you put a good person, a well-intentioned, good human being inside of a bad system, I would say 10 times out of 10, eventually that system is going to prevail. And so first and foremost, we need to challenge and potentially shift or change that system. You look at a CEO like Doug Parker, he's now former CEO of American Airlines. He publicly said, we're a public company, but I make decisions to only appease 20% of my shareholders. The other 80% aren't investors, they're gamblers. And I'm not going to make decisions for them. I'm only going to make decisions for the Berkshire Hathaways of the world, who are the company that Buffett's firm invested in American Airlines. I'm only going to make decisions for them. Right? So shift in mind, right? Good old kinky boots. You can change your world when you change your mind. When a leader or someone or society has a shift in mindset, a transformation, nothing has changed yet. Everything is different. When a CEO realizes, oh, wow, my job is to care for and protect the people who show up and work here. You can shift things when you shift actions. So let's say I want to create more empathy in my company, but I can't make that an instruction. I can't say, hey, Mitch, do me a favor, more empathy this afternoon, please, right? Like, it doesn't work. But I could say, hey, Mitch, there's something that we're trying out. For every one-on-one with you have with your direct reports, you must ask these questions. The first question is, how are you? The response will be something like good or fine. Then you must ask, no, really, how are you truly doing? And then zip it. And then equip them with further tools and things they can ask to exude empathy, and they can actually act their way into the feeling of empathy, which can be pretty powerful. So it's these 3 gears. We need all of them. But if you have mindset, you have actions, but you don't have the right systems, you can get a denon, where you have a great leader who's doing the right things, but he's forced out because the system isn't ready for it. So it's all 3 of those. And I think some of these conversations are beyond our pay grades, but we hope to help support the people who can help make these shifts as well.
How much has the physical shift of how we work impacted the way in which we want to see this going forward? A lot of the leaders I'm speaking to will say, we're moving at 100 miles per hour. Our team are begging for more personal development and ways in which we can help them improve in professional development as well.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, they don't want us adding to their workload, and in particular, being a time-based thing. Take this great course we have on empathy. It'll be 8 hours, and it's another day at work. I have to do this.
Yeah.
And then we have just the reality of hybrid work from home, remote, in person. There's been a dynamic shift that it takes functional time. I mean, this is the thing we don't often talk a lot about. How's it working for your organization? I think every organization is really different, and trying to meander around this reality that managers probably spend a lot more time managing because of the nature of where everyone is and how they have to operate. We've almost diminished that because we don't want to talk about, and giving managers too much work. We're stressing them out. But I think leaders and managers are still really stressed out with this because it's not what everyone's accustomed to. what does that look like in terms of fostering this? I would see that as a larger hurdle to get these ideas across because the physicalness of work has changed so radically.
Yeah, so a lot there. I mean, one, if your approach to teaching empathy or developing empathy is an 8-hour full day session, I think you're doing it wrong. Let's talk about micro learning and implementing that. So that's a different conversation.
Have you heard of this thing called Thinkers One? I believe it's an excellent solution. Go on. Yeah.
And we will now pause for our paid partnership. Yeah,
exactly. Steve, please go ahead and read this for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Ever feel stuck in a meeting? Call 1-800. No, go to thinkersone.com. So I think a big piece of your question, Mitch, is how do we create a speak up culture when there's different ways of working and the ways of working are evolving? Office, remote, hybrid, workloads, new leaders. Like there's so many forces that are making work, relationships, life, leadership hard. How do we make it easy and better? So one are some really neat tips, tricks, and tactics to make a speak up culture come to life in different ways of working. The other is I'll take from a concept from my colleague Simon Sinek around in infinite games like life, career, business, games that have mile markers but no endpoints. There's no winner of life or career or business. There are two currencies, and the two currencies are, yes, resources, time, money, people, whatever it might be. There's also another lesser known and untapped resource, which is the will of the people. And you can actually be under-resourced, but if you do things right, you lead people well, you have purpose, you ensure that people are playing to their strengths, you have high trusting environments, you can actually gain and get more from the resources you do have. It's the difference between the US 1992 men's basketball team, who was the best resource team ever, but couldn't gel because they had no idea how to be role players. They were all stars, right? Versus a team that's under-resourced, or take a Vietnam or a Ukraine as an example. They're under-resourced, but they're fighting for something. They're fighting for democracy. They're fighting for their way of life, whatever it might be. So that's another dynamic of how can we increase will through purpose, play, and potential, which is from McGregor and Doshi from their book Prime to Perform. How can we increase will? The other is hybrid and remote and all that. So there's something that we miss when we're in person. You and I were at an event recently. We both had to go to the airport. We made this connection and we said, hey, let's share an Uber together. And we got a bonus 45 minutes in a car, getting to chat, which was beautiful, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry, texting each other, and it's the nature of it, yeah.
Which was fantastic. And that was serendipity, right? If let's say we were both going to the airport at the same time, but we had to schedule a phone call, like there's all these things that get in the way when you get into remote and hybrid working. What you miss is the moments of serendipity. Those moments where you're heading to the airport, me too, let's go. That's serendipity that happens because we're in person together at the same event, right? Or at an office or whatever it might be. What we need to design are what are those moments of serendipity that we can create, even if we're behind Slack or email or Zoom or whatever it might be. One fun thing is that when everyone began to work from home, you all of a sudden saw trinkets, like little things. I had a pre-engagement call with a client. I saw that they had tons of Star Wars trinkets, and we started talking about Star Wars. Huge Star Wars fan. The week before the event, I got a little clip, "May the Force be with you" or something that I grabbed and gave it to him when I saw him the next week. So meaningful, right? And the only reason I got that is because I got to see their space. So how can we still create moments of pause, serendipity, relationship, whether remote, hybrid, or when we do bring people together for events or into the office?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it more in the management by moving around, which was a big idea of Tom Peters, Henry Mintzberg, and a few others for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? I mean, sure, prior to the pandemic, you'd have the leader hopping to different continents and different cities for sure. But I do think something is missed when everybody is working in such weird and different schedules. Like, I wonder if you don't. I always think that the culture comes together. It's the cracks in the pavement. It's not the sidewalk. And I'm always curious about how that plays out and how that speaks into a culture where you feel more connected versus less. I haven't not had people say to me things like, I feel really disconnected. And I'm like, well, you work from home. It's just like, I just got to like end the sentence at that point. And I don't know how we reconcile that. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a place where we have these incredible cultures that we hear, but we haven't heard. What's interesting is prior to the pandemic, we'd even see things like, big tech have their campuses and they were called like cities and they have cafes. It looked like a city, like legitimately people live there.
Mhm.
Dry cleaning, have, mobile tooth cleaning, dental things come in. We don't even talk about things like that anymore, it seems. Like we've had a real change in our physicality of work.
Yeah, I mean, but we can be around people and feel lonely, and we can be
Yeah.
around no one but feel completely connected. I worked on a remote team for 10 years before COVID, and it was an amazing connected team. And
But that
members of
was,
that,
yeah. Well, what's interesting there is, well, like, we should talk about Simon Sinek. But what's amazing about that is, I think when it's created remote
mm,
and people are coming in knowing it's that versus it was forced, our skill level, how we do it, even understanding as an individual, how do I work best versus what do I just like? Because sometimes what you
mhm,
like is what's best for you. We forget a lot about these things. People go like, it's really great for my life.
yeah,
You think.
I like scotch. I like
Yeah.
scotch, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what's the question or what's the prompt? What do you say more?
I feel it's different when everybody is built for it versus everybody's forced into something and the situation changes. And often the organizations don't have the scaffolding
Yeah.
to help them optimize to do these things that a group like Simon Sinek's group did so well.
Yeah, but I think we saw crazy amounts of innovation at lightning speeds that I had a client that was working for 3 years on automating a payroll thing or an HR thing that they did in 6 weeks, or completely make all hiring remote because they had to. So I reflect back on my time on Simon's team, because we were a remote team through and through since I joined in 2011, right? Very few remote teams in 2011. Um, we were clear on why we were on that team. We had very clear values of how we treat each other, what behavior is rewarded versus what behavior is not tolerated. And leaders cared. And so,
Hmm.
you know, there's still something, even if you're in Montreal, I'm in Toronto, we work on the same team, I can still text you and say, I'm thinking about you. I don't have any agenda. I just want to know how you are. Let me know when you have 10 minutes, right? Different than a leader saying, let me know when you have 5 minutes. You need the preface so they don't think they're being fired. But I do think we have an ability on the phone, over Zoom, using technology for us, not the other way around, not technology using us. I do still think that we can create care and connection, and then use in-person gatherings to amplify and heighten that. I think it's possible. I know it's possible because I've lived it. And people in that culture previously came from office environments where they were like, "This is new to me and this is different," and they adapted.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how a speak up culture works. The intuitive brain would say it's top down. Leader decides this is the type of business we have and this is how it works. Also intuitive would be it's kind of hard to just say that. It's probably going to happen the more and more you have people speaking up and doing things and being mostly rewarded for what they're speaking up for. Hopefully these are good things.
Mhm.
How does it play out? I think it does tie a little bit into how we see culture too. You'll have people tell you culture's top down, have people tell you culture's absolutely bottom up.
Yeah, I mean, you and I could work at an organization with an amazing reputation and have an awful leader and have an awful experience of that organization. Similarly, we could work for an organization that has a bad reputation, but have a fantastic team, a fantastic leader. So culture is very much what you experience and see, because we spend what? Is it like 40% of our time with 15 people? So, or maybe it's even 60%. I think it's 40. But, so much of culture is where we are. I do think, though, that there's two things. Culture very much can be influenced from top down, but the tail can also wag the dog. So it's both. It can be bottom up and it can be top down. It can be both. The two actions that we must do to create a speak up culture is encourage folks to speak up and then reward them when they do. So regardless of if it's a one-on-one relationship, a team, anything, as long as we encourage folks to use their voice and then reward them when they do, you will get a speak up culture. Now, there's also, I've learned there's the speak up culture spectrum. So a speak up culture ought to include tact, decency, respect, emotional intelligence, situational awareness as sort of bare minimums in that game. What a speak up culture is not, is it's not sucking up. That's hogging air. That's someone saying, ooh, boss says speak up all the time. I'll just do it. No, 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 no. That's zip it. That's, the feedback in that scenario is, I'm so glad you feel comfortable using your voice. The true test of our culture is how many more voices we hear. Zip it. Here are 3 coins. You can spend them in our team meetings next week.
Yeah.
On the other end, a speak up culture is not a hall pass to be a jerk. And sometimes we may show up as a jerk intentionally or unintentionally or without knowing it. And in that scenario, the feedback and coaching is there might be merit in what was spoken up, and the intent may even be solid, but the feedback there is the behavior and the impact of your behavior had a negative impact. And so keep speaking up, but we got to shift the way in which you do it, how you do it, when you do it.
When we say it like that, Shed, it sounds a bit pushy. It sounds a bit condescending in the way of, we want you to speak up, but there's certain parameters here. We want you to. What is that balance? Because we are talking about people who typically, I don't think we have that great of an EQ. I think the online world is just an amplification of the fact that people aren't necessarily great at that. So how do they react to this idea of speak up, but there's a little hallway here I want you to think about with coins and this, and you're doing it wrong, and now you're a troll, and now you've spoken up, and now everyone's eye rolling. And
but I think it is. So when I think of a speak up spectrum, I think of what are values that help guide our behavior to be generative. And so when I say things like tact, decency, respect, emotional intelligence, which is a hard one, situational awareness, which is a hard one, but then these provide basis for still rewarding behavior with positive intent, but providing feedback on when people might be unaware of the impact that some of their behavior may have had. Which isn't a silencing technique. It's a let me provide feedback so that you can continue to be more successful. The other thing which you point to, Mitch, is the more senior one gets in a culture, they must be aware that their whisper is a shout and their tiptoes are stomps. And so I really coach and counsel leaders. The more senior you get, you must know that though feedback should be based upon factual events, your feedback is not indeed fact. It is but opinion. And the purpose of feedback is dialogue to help feed one another. It's not called knock down back. It's called feedback. And so if you take that risk and to provide feedback, the goal is to start dialogue, and the goal is to help one another grow. So it isn't a right wrong. It's not a black and white. It's a gray. And it's a tool in practice in becoming better.
I was thinking a lot about whistleblowers and reading your book. What were you thinking about whistleblowers?
So whistleblowing is an act where you whistleblow externally. My experience is that most whistleblowers will try to speak up internally. Not all, but most. I highlight a couple of whistleblowers in the book, both of whom have become friends, and they're wonderful people. Ed Pearson at Boeing, and we're seeing many, many more whistleblowers unearthed at Boeing. Another is Dr. Kimberly McClear at the U.S. Coast Guard, who spoke up around harassment and sexual harassment. Whistleblowing often is done out of it's the last straw. Typically, it's not typically the first straw. And yeah, it takes great courageous leadership typically to be a whistleblower.
Is it something that
we were you thinking about whistleblowing?
I was thinking about it in relation to it is the bravest form of speak up culture, and perhaps that many leaders wouldn't want to have that type of brave speak up culture in their organizations if given the choice.
Yeah. Well, this
is
the
paradox.
Why, but this is why whistleblowing is external. It's a last cry for help. It's a last result. So when I first started writing this book, I fully thought I was just rebranding psychological safety. I'm a big fan of the concept, not such a big fan of the term. It's a clunky term. It's highly academic. It can be inaccessible. And so I leaned into good old Zig Ziglar, people don't buy drills, they buy holes. Well, if the drill is psychological safety, the whole of what you get is a speak up culture. But as I delved into it, there's a matrix. And the matrix is, as you know, safety and impact. So a speak up culture is when you both feel safe, not lack of comfort. There's actually discomfort in a speak up culture because it takes a risk to speak up. It's not about comfort and no consequences for speaking up. No. It's creating an environment in which the discomfort feels safe enough and worth it to take that risk. But then you have other quadrants. So in the bottom left, it's low safety, low impact. That's an unhappy marriage between fear and apathy or fear and futility. There's high safety, but low impact. I have psychological safety. Let's say, I'm giving you feedback about something that's getting in your way. I build up the courage to have that conversation. I feel safe to have that intervention with you. Nothing changes. I wait 6 months. I have the conversation again. Nothing changes. I do it again. Nothing changes. How many times do I go back to a dry well before I'm like, I might feel psychologically safe, but there's no impact to anything I'm doing? I'm not going to speak up anymore. And then the other one, which is whistleblowing, is often found here, where it doesn't feel safe, but it feels worth it. You feel connected to stakes, human life, ethics, safety, whatever it might be, that oftentimes at personal risk, you will speak up because you feel it's the right thing to do.
Do you think that we are treating whistleblowers fairly? Do you think that it's still... I mean, this is one of the topics that I definitely struggle with. You want to think that we live in a world where you want that full transparency. You also want to live in a world where you hope that that individual truly did escalate it, that it was visibly blocked, that it was visibly shot down. I've seen instances where people whistleblow and it hasn't even escalated beyond their immediate manager. And I often wonder at that point, like, ethically, yeah, I understand there's a problem here and it should be brought up. But if that individual also really didn't take it to the fullest extent, why are we like, we've had these stories where they aren't.
Well, so again, whistleblowing is an external act. So whistleblowing is when you go outside of the organization and you say, this is wrong over here, and the public needs to know because there's an ethical or safety concern or whatever it might be. And if it gets to that point, it's typically an indication that that culture is not a speak up culture.
Yeah.
Right. And you have an environment in which folks are being punished or ignored, repeatedly ignored or worse, punished for raising a concern.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And we've seen that at Boeing, and we continue to see it at Boeing. Even worse, if you then whistleblow and there's threats to you, really hard. So,
or the environment ahead of you is complicit in it and doesn't want it to be known, whether that's, saying that you have environmentally friendly cars or otherwise.
Yes, Das Auto.
Little people have little sections of knowing what's what. No one has the full picture. So there's this weird sense of deniability. But then when the whistleblower comes out, it looks like everybody was kind of in cahoots and knew about it.
But it's still, even if you don't know as a senior leader, what's the condition that you're creating at your table and their table and so on and so forth. I mean, I love the story of Alan Mulally, and it's used so often because it's so good, right? When he took over at Ford, he did what every one of us would do when we take over a team. You have team meetings with your direct reports with a simple green, yellow, red status report, and everything was green, even though the company was about to go bankrupt. And so he said, and by the way, the reason that was happening is the previous leadership was far more tyrannic. If you brought up a yellow, dare a red, you just weren't at the next meeting. It was like sitting at a table with Dr. Evil. And so Mulally said, we need to, quote, embrace more truth-telling in this organization. Either you're lying to me, your people are lying to you, or you're lying to yourselves. There's no way everything is green. If we're going to turn this thing around, we need to tell more truth. The other thing, which I think connects us all, is you look at a Boeing And though you could argue that in the short term and at moments, there has been an economic benefit to their unethical ways,
Right.
they were contacted by American Airlines, a major customer of theirs, saying, we're about to purchase A321neos, build us a new single aisle jet. To which Boeing apparently said, and I think American called in 2008. Boeing said, give us 7 to 8 years. American Airlines, the responsibility of a vendor as well, said, you have 5. Well, we know that any external pressure, time or economic, can cause people to act unethically. That doesn't give Boeing the excuse, but it doesn't give American Airlines the excuse either for the pressure that they provided.
Yeah.
And so Boeing makes the decision, instead of making a new airplane, which they did with the Dreamliner. Now we're seeing that may not be a safe airplane either because of a lack of a safety culture, even though it has some pretty cool features, that aircraft. 40% humidity, yes, please. But they made a decision to give a plane that hadn't received a significant update since 1967 a facelift. Bigger engines make it aerodynamically less sound, right? But they made an expedient balance sheet choice, right? And they've made a plane that didn't require more certification at the time. Now it does. Like, they made all these shortcut decisions all in the interest of profit. And I think we could very much make the argument, Mitch, that Boeing reputationally and financially is worse off because of the decisions that they made. And if they don't turn that thing around, and dare I say, axe the max, I don't think Boeing Commercial is going to be around in 5 years.
Yeah. Spending a lot of time talking about planes. I guess it's a really public one that we can talk about.
It's public, and it's easier to talk about instances, healthcare, law enforcement, airplane manufacturers, nuclear, things where mistakes are life and death, because the lessons are just as humane, but more salient, more germane.
Let's go back to the individual. Tell me a little bit about the notion of it's just business. Don't take it so personally. You need thick skin. I always struggled with these. I think I've even written about them in my books. This idea of, I take it really personally because I'm spending a lot of hours here during a day where I'd much rather not have to do this if I didn't have to. Financially, of course, we have to work.
Yeah.
And I don't have thick skin. It's, this story is standard. You can get 1,000 great book reviews for Speak Up Culture, but that 1 star is going to haunt you at night.
Hey, speak for yourself.
Yeah, I've had more than 1 star, so I'm okay with it now. I can reconcile it that way.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, maybe we do live in a world where people are clearly don't have thick skin and people do take it very personally, or are we missing something here?
So I'm reflecting upon a recent experience. I work with a client who's a senior leader, VP at a big multinational, gone through very public layoffs. And one of the people that they had to lay off was someone who moved and joined his team on purpose. They wanted to work for him.
Right.
And unfortunately, though that person is a great leader, they didn't have domain technical expertise in the type of organization that they're in. And unfortunately, a wonderful human being and leader got laid off. And my friend and client had to communicate that. Now, because of legal reasons, he had to follow a certain script. Yeah. Like, it sucked.
Hey, you're fired, take your stuff, we can talk later type of thing. Speak to HR and we'll speak later. Yeah, I love that.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And yet the person who was laying off, the person who was a loyal leader on their team and wonderful, and not just loyal, but a great effective challenger, just a wonderful person on their team, because of technicality got laid off. Didn't feel great. But my client and friend still showed up as a human being and sent them a text message after and said, I hate that I had to do that. I didn't want to do that. I had to follow a script. When this settles down, I'm here for you. And if you're willing, I would love to chat. To which the person on the receiving end of that text totally appreciated it. And so,
look, I mean, that's great, but we've seen that be the first step to a lawsuit.
That's the exception, not the. Yeah, sure. I mean, sure. Okay. But it's how do we still exude some humanity in even if there are forces that are trying to make us not human.
It's interesting because what you're bringing up is a really interesting example, which ties into where I was going at the beginning of the economics of it, the Jack Welch story.
Mm-hmm.
And the factors of the marketplace don't allow you to do that. And I think legal and HR in that case is really similar. Like you're right, I hadn't thought about it in that way where we're letting you go. You will speak to HR. Your email's already been shut down. No, you can't communicate with anybody. We can talk about this though later once you sign those papers and do what we need to protect our like. So again, this speaks actually more into why I can be frustrated with these topics. Just
Mm-hmm.
fine, like it's natural, human, and we should have these conversations. Is we say this and we believe it, but ultimately, when it comes to letting you go, I'm going to be the a-hole, and because I have to follow this. And why we're doing this because 5 people before you got really frustrated. We had lawsuits, and so it's a financial thing. It sort of extracts everything we're trying to say. It gets into this place where I think this is why people get frustrated with these conversations. People genuinely say that's great, but at the end of the day, I wasn't treated like that. Even though everybody's woo woo and bring your best self and do all that, at the end of the day, to even get rid of me, it becomes this calculated assassination. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's on a mercy killing. It's like,
yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the video where there was someone who was in a sales role at a tech firm. I forget which one, and she was enrolled for like 3 months, hired on a slow end of a sales cycle, great performance reviews, everything was going the right direction, and she videotaped herself
right,
as
yeah.
she was getting fired, of which they tried to fire her for cause, of which she's like, why can't you just tell me that you just put things into an Excel sheet and I was on the wrong end?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
and it's funny. I have a note here, Shed. Living this when we do spreadsheet executions. It's literally one of my notes.
Yeah. So we don't trust people to follow the rules. We trust people to know to have the discretion to break them.
Right.
Which takes humanity and context and platinum rule rather than golden rule, which I write about in the book, right?
Yeah.
Treat others the way they wish to be treated.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you have a long-standing relationship with someone and they were on the wrong end of an Excel sheet execution, which again, I'm not a fan of, it means that you've managed your business irresponsibly to the point that you have to do that.
But maybe you didn't, right? Sometimes you are a middle person in this. Very often you are. It's not that I've been in situations where the business is doing great. The bigger, greater business isn't doing great, or that department had problems. I've been in places where you can't offer your employees certain benefits and bonuses for having a great year in a world where unfortunately we're part of a greater thing that isn't having a great and this is where I always get with this stuff. It's like, do we just say this so that we can be happy, so that you and I can say, look, this is how we should do it, but actually we don't. And I do think about even back in the day when you'd have on Twitter, then it was called Twitter, people being dragged off of airplanes by their hair, and then the next quarter the airlines revenue's up. Like, these are doing great. People aren't like, oh, we're gonna. How can we get on planes when people are being dragged off like this?
No.
And these are the things that real people see. These are the things that people of thin skin see. These are the people who would speak up and take things personally see. And this is always my struggle with this. Is we are still put in this box that has all of these things that don't placate to what we actually like. We would all agree with it, and yet we're all in the system that doesn't allow for it. And so we act as if this system, this arbitrary thing, it's okay. Like that's how we justify it that way. And I think that's where my struggle with a lot of these things are. It's like, yeah, okay. At the end of the day, productivity's down. Right? It's like, well, we're good. We got to speak up culture.
Yeah. I mean, and this is where ethics can fade.
Yeah.
Where, I'm not the one who ordered the execution, but yet I'm the one who has to fulfill upon it.
And I'd rather do that and keep my job than be the person I was telling everybody to be. Like, the humanity of it does get us to a place where again, you talk about fulfillment, not happiness, which I think is so true.
Mm-hmm.
I would be okay with that. So let's just put aside happiness. It's work. I do this as an economic thing. I do these things. You give me these things. And
Yeah.
let's not try to pretend that it's family or friends or that we need to look. I sometimes do look back and wonder if we kind of lost the plot by trying to integrate all these social components into it when it's actually a capitalist system and that this is what we're moving towards. So let's just agree to be brutal. And I don't know why we struggle with that. It's like we want to make it something it's not.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not a fan of this is a family or it's like a family,
Yeah.
unless it's a legit family business,
Yeah,
which
which is, you know,
everyone is part of the family.
Right. And you really don't want to work for a family business is the other side of it. But
Yeah. Well, no, you're not really joking.
Yeah,
That's okay.
I'm not really joking.
So you touched on the difference of happiness and fulfillment. So I'm not a fan of the pursuit of happiness. I'm a fan of the pursuit of
Me
fulfillment.
too. Yeah.
Right? Happiness is fleeting. You can be unhappy but fulfilled.
Yeah.
Because happiness is a emotion. It's a moment.
You also don't have to be passionate about it. You could just be someone who's good at this. That's good enough. Yeah.
Yes. Fulfillment is when you use your strengths, the things that put you into flow, toward contributing towards something bigger than yourself that you care about. I want more and more people to experience fulfillment at work and fulfillment generally in life. We work 90,000 hours of our lives. I'm of the belief that we should enjoy those hours to the best of our ability.
Me too.
And I want people to feel safe and secure, or at least transparent with what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So do I think that we can do the work to help people find what their strengths are, use those strengths to contribute towards something that is more meaningful than profit? Yes. Is that every workplace all the time? No. Am I trying to use my work and my efforts to create more environments, whether it's in for-profit, in for impact, in government, and wherever, where people feel that they use their strengths to contribute towards something bigger than profit? Yeah, because I think that's great.
I'm curious about your perception of, I'll call them the visionaries. Some might call them the incompatibles. We have these companies. If we just look at the ones that are really striking and have dramatic growth, the leaders seem to be these. I think Guy Kawasaki said this about Steve Jobs, that he was incompatible. That was a great phrase for that.
Musk too, I'm sure, is incompatible.
Just look at big tech. You could look at other industries where there is an 800-pound gorilla in that industry. Typically, these leaders look very different than even they might sound in their public discourse.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people are attracted to these types of organizations. And what do we do about they're driven, and clearly it's effective. It's not like we can't look. You can think what you want about Musk. It's hard to argue commercialized space with electric cars, solar powers, satellite-based internet. This is one guy. This is one business.
Yeah. So there are some attributes here that are really interesting, and attributes that aren't necessarily indicators of leader or leadership.
True.
You do not need to be a visionary to be a leader. You need to connect to a vision. I think every single leader needs to contribute and serve and follow something bigger than themselves, but you don't need to be a visionary to be a leader. And I think one of the things that we do is, if you're a visionary, we just assume you're a leader. And that ain't the case, which is when I think there's a rise of people in leadership positions who are narcissists, because we reward charisma and vision without the other key attributes and behaviors of leadership: compassion, empathy, service orientation, authenticity, decisiveness, accountability, courage, humility. That's the soup and stew of a leader. A leader need not be charismatic, need not be warm. My best leader ever, Mitch, was cold and grumpy consistently, but I never had a doubt that she had my back and she cared about my personal well-being, growth, and development. Never. And she was consistently that way. But I think we give folks a hall pass into earning leadership status because they're an iconoclast, because they're a visionary.
Mm.
Valuable, but they need a team around them that keeps them on their path and doesn't get them into other areas where they shouldn't be, and or shines a light in the mirror back to them on their strengths and on their limitations.
Yeah.
Because we're all fallible. So yeah, I visionary, valuable, moves us forward. But this automatic hall pass of you're a visionary, oh, you must be a leader. Steve Jobs, visionary, nurturing, wonderful leader, visionary.
Yeah, you do coaching, and I can see how great of a coach you are in the conversation that we're having, and how you're thinking about things and moving in directions that, again, would not typically have been answered that way.
Thanks.
And there's something unique in that too, because people need to be coachable.
Mm.
And this is where I was thinking about it. Some of the best challenges I had professionally was when somebody was seeing in me something that I didn't see in myself. And it may not have been delivered in the best and most empathetic way possible. And I spent a lot of time in the martial arts world, and I can promise you it's never delivered in a compassionate and easy way there. Not the professional world, but I've been in the professional world too, where they are moving fast. They see something in that individual that knows that that person can keep pace. And ultimately, even if that individual isn't happy when they leave, they will be able to say, I learned and saw things I could just never. You don't have to love the person to love
The
what.
growth.
And even if it came in maybe a bit of a negative or opposing packaging,
Yeah.
it's really hard to think about that, like, emotionally. You know what I mean? Like, we could say, like, oh, because people will quit. Like, that's the part of it where people say that person is this way. It's and I don't know if they ever really realize what could have been, or what the potential is. I guess it's the same thing with coal, right? You're going to put pressure on it. Maybe you have a diamond, maybe you just have, dust at the end of it.
Yeah.
But that's the part where I often think about too, how many people would leave places like an Amazon and Apple and say completely incompatible and everything you just said. And I've never been challenged or grown more. And I don't think I could be CEO of company XYZ or followed up and done my dream job had I not been subjugated to that.
Yeah. And I think you can still learn from experiences and feedback and other people, even if their intent is malice. You can still learn and grow from that. My hope is that even if it's delivered in a way that's hard to swallow, my hope is it's still delivered with care. Or it's the Kim Scott radical candor again. Challenge personally,
Yeah.
or care personally, challenge directly. It's both of those. You can still grow if it's challenged directly and not care personally. But, again, thick skin, and not everyone is for that environment. I think the most attractive trait that I look for in any leader, whether they're a capital L or lowercase l leader, right? Capital L, senior leader, lowercase l, no authority, but they choose to behave as a leader does. The best quality that I've come across is humility, is that willingness to acknowledge that I'm both part of my success and a part of my failures and challenges and problems. And if you get feedback that you don't like to hear, but you're still willing to entertain, a piece of that could be true, or it stings and triggers because it's probably true, right? And feel free to take the word probably out of there. And if you get the same feedback, even if it's separated by years or decades, you, my friend, have a pattern, and patterns should be paid attention to. So feedback isn't easy to hear oftentimes, even if it's delivered with care, compassion, and artfully. But it's those among us that take it seriously that grow and become better.
That's great. So, you tell me the one thing that made you think differently.
The one thing that made me think differently. See, you even prefaced me with this, and now I'm still fumbling.
I love it.
Yeah. The one thing that made me think differently. The one thing that made me think differently is that when the gap between what you say and do matters.
Mm.
And that if you say one thing and do the opposite, it'll catch up eventually. And it may not catch up publicly. It may not catch up in all of your relationships, but it'll catch up. And so I'm just really attracted and try to spend as much of my time with people who they don't need to be loud and public about it, but there's a strong correlation between what they say and what they do. There's a strong correlation to me between who they seem to be and who they actually are.
I love it. The book is called Speak Up Culture. Shed, let people know they can find out more information about you, other content you're creating, whatever you want to let us know how to hunt you down.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Stephen Shadletsky in the entire world for the time being. So all you handfuls of Shedletskys, please name your children mindfully. If you Google my name, you'll find me in all the places. Most active on LinkedIn, and you can learn more on the website Shed, SHED, inspires.com.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. A joy.